August 9, 1945, 2:37 a.m., Tokyo. Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori is pulled from sleep by a telephone. The voice on the other end belongs to his deputy, and the words stop his breath. The Soviet Union has declared war. Soviet forces are crossing the Manchurian border. Now. Togo sets down the receiver. His hand trembles. For months, Japan's entire diplomatic strategy has rested on a single desperate hope: that Moscow might broker a peace with the Americans. That hope is dead. He dresses in the dark. His mind races through the implications. The Kwantung Army, once Japan's most elite force, over 700,000 men, is supposed to hold Manchuria. But Togo knows the truth that the propaganda conceals. The army has been hollowed out. Its best divisions, its tanks, its aircraft, all stripped away and sent to defend the home islands against the expected American invasion. What remains is a shell. Reservists, boys, old men, equipment from a decade ago. And now, the Soviets are coming. 3,000 miles to the northwest, the scale of what is unfolding defies comprehension. Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky commands the largest military operation in Soviet history. 1.5 million men, over 5,000 tanks, nearly 4,000 aircraft, 26,000 artillery pieces. The force stretches across a front spanning more than 4,000 kilometers, from the Mongolian steppe to the Sea of Japan. 3 separate army groups strike simultaneously from the west, the north, and the east. Operation August Storm is not an invasion, it is an annihilation. The Japanese garrison commanders in Manchuria receive the first reports and cannot believe them. Soviet tanks are advancing at speeds that seem impossible, 40, 50, even 60 kilometers per day across terrain the Japanese believed impassable. Entire divisions are being bypassed, surrounded, and left to wither. The carefully prepared defensive lines, the fortified zones built over a decade, mean nothing. The Soviets are not attacking the defenses. They are ignoring them. In the headquarters of the Kwantung Army at Changchun, General Yamada Otozo stares at a map that is becoming obsolete by the hour. Red arrows are punching through everywhere. His communications are collapsing. Units are reporting contact with Soviet armor, then going silent. He has no reserves, no air cover, no answer. Back in Tokyo, the Imperial War Council convenes in emergency session as dawn breaks over the city. The men who gather in the underground bunker beneath the Imperial Palace know that Japan is dying. Hiroshima was destroyed 3 days ago by a single bomb, a weapon of incomprehensible power. The Americans have promised more. The naval blockade is strangling the home islands. Firebombing has reduced 66 cities to ash. And now the Soviets. Prime Minister Suzuki Kantaro opens the meeting. His face is gray. The military chiefs, War Minister Anami Korichika, Army Chief of Staff Umezu Yoshijiro, Navy Chief of Staff Toyota Suemu, sit in rigid silence. They have spent months arguing that Japan can fight on, that a decisive battle on the home islands will inflict such casualties on the Americans that a negotiated peace will follow, that the Soviets will stay neutral. Foreign Minister Togo speaks first. His voice is quiet, but his words land like hammer blows. Gentlemen, our strategy is finished. We placed our hope in Soviet mediation. That hope no longer exists. The Soviet Union is not our intermediary. The Soviet Union is our enemy. We must accept the Potsdam Declaration. We must surrender. War Minister Anami's jaw tightens. The army will fight to the last man. We will make the enemy pay in blood for every inch of sacred soil. The people are prepared to die. The people, Togo interrupts, are starving. The army in Manchuria is being destroyed as we speak. In 3 days, perhaps less, Soviet forces will reach the Korean border. Then what? They will not stop. They will take Hokkaido, and we cannot stop them. The room falls silent. Everyone knows he is right. In Manchuria, the disaster is unfolding faster than anyone in Tokyo can comprehend. The Soviet Trans-Baikal Front under Marshal Rodion Malinovsky is executing a maneuver that military historians will study for generations. His tank columns, spearheaded by the 6th Guards Tank Army, are driving through the Greater Khingan Mountain Range. Japanese intelligence assessed this route as impassable for armor. The terrain is brutal. Steep mountain passes, no roads, temperatures that swing from scorching days to freezing nights. The Soviets are doing it anyway. They have prepared for months. Fuel depots have been pre-positioned across the Mongolian steppe. Engineering battalions have surveyed every kilometer of the advance. Tank crews have trained specifically for extended operations without resupply. And now, they are covering distances that seem impossible. On August 11th, just 2 days into the offensive, lead elements of the 6th Guards Tank Army emerge from the mountains and descend onto the Manchurian plain. They have advanced over 300 kilometers. Japanese units positioned to defend the mountain passes find themselves bypassed, irrelevant, trapped. Lieutenant General Ushiroku Jun, commanding the Japanese 3rd Area Army, receives the reports and realizes the truth. There is no front line. There is no defense. The Soviets are not fighting the Kwantung Army. They are dismembering it. In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito summons Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal, Kido Koichi, to his private chambers. The emperor, a slight man of 44, trained as a marine biologist, never comfortable with the military role thrust upon him, has been watching the arguments of his ministers with growing despair. For years he has remained above politics, a divine symbol rather than a decision-maker. But now someone must decide. Kido enters and bows. The emperor's voice is soft, almost fragile. Kido, what do you believe our situation to be? Kido chooses his words carefully. Your Majesty, the situation is beyond retrieval. The atomic bomb has changed everything. And now, the Soviets. We have no diplomatic options remaining. If we continue, there will be no Japan left to save. The emperor is silent for a long moment. Then, I have studied the maps. Manchuria is lost. Korea will follow. If we do not act, the Soviets will demand their share of the occupation. They will take Hokkaido, perhaps more. Is this not so? It is so, Your Majesty. Another silence. Then the emperor speaks again, and his words will change history. I cannot bear to see my people suffer any longer. The time has come to bear the unbearable. August 12, 1945. The Soviet advance continues to accelerate. In the east, the First Far Eastern Front under Marshal Kirill Meretskov has smashed through the Japanese border fortifications in hours. Fortresses that were supposed to hold for months fell in a single day. The Soviet assault combined overwhelming artillery bombardment with infantry and armor attacks at multiple points simultaneously. The defenders, many of them reservists with minimal training, never had a chance. Japanese soldiers are surrendering by the thousands. Entire regiments are laying down their arms without serious resistance. The spirit that drove Japanese forces to fight to the death on Iwo Jima, on Okinawa, on 100 Pacific islands, that spirit is absent here. These men have not been indoctrinated with the same fanaticism. They are garrison troops, not shock troops, and they can see what is coming. A Soviet tank commander, advancing through a captured town, later records his observation. The Japanese seemed stunned. They did not expect us. They did not expect the speed. Many simply sat by the roadside and waited to be captured. They had no will left to fight. By the end of the 4th day, Soviet forces have advanced over 600 kilometers on multiple axes. The Kwantung Army, supposedly Japan's shield in Asia, has effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. In Tokyo, the Supreme War Council meets again, and again, and again. The debates are agonizing. War Minister Anami insists that Japan must secure better terms. At minimum, guarantees that the emperor will not be tried as a war criminal, that Japan will disarm itself rather than submit to occupation, that there will be no foreign troops on sacred soil. Foreign Minister Togo argues that Japan has no leverage for such demands. The Americans hold the atomic bomb. The Soviets are advancing. Every hour of delay costs lives. The Council splits. 3 for immediate acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, 3 for continued resistance. The deadlock seems unbreakable. But everyone knows what is happening in Manchuria. The reports arrive hourly, each one worse than the last. Mukden threatened, Changchun encircled, Harbin falling. The names blur together into a single message of catastrophe. The empire that Japan spent 50 years building in Asia is being erased in days. Admiral Toyota, who has argued for continuing the war, finally speaks the truth that everyone is thinking. The Soviet entry changes everything. We planned for an American invasion. We did not plan for this. We cannot fight both. We cannot fight either. The question is no longer whether to surrender, but how quickly we can do so before the Soviets take what they want. August 14th, 1945. 11 p.m., the Imperial Palace. In an unprecedented breach of centuries of protocol, Emperor Hirohito convenes an imperial conference in his presence and announces that he will make the decision himself. The ministers sit in stunned silence as the emperor speaks. His voice is thin, strained, close to breaking. But his words are clear. I have given serious thought to the situation prevailing at home and abroad, and have concluded that continuing the war means destruction for the nation and prolongation of bloodshed and cruelty in the world. Those who argue for continuing the war speak of decisive battle on the homeland, but the experience of Manchuria shows that our expectations are not met. The army speaks of preparations, but the fortifications in Manchuria were supposed to hold. They did not hold for a single day. He pauses. The room is absolutely still. I cannot bear to see my innocent people struggle any longer. Ending the war is the only way to restore world peace and to relieve the nation from the terrible distress with which it is burdened. War Minister Anami, the strongest voice for continued resistance, bows his head. Tears stream down his face. The emperor has spoken. Japan will surrender. The Soviet advance does not stop. Even as Japanese diplomats scramble to transmit their acceptance of the Potsdam terms, even as Emperor Hirohito prepares to record his radio address announcing the surrender, Soviet tanks keep rolling. Marshal Vasilevsky has orders to take as much territory as possible before any ceasefire takes effect. By August 15th, the day the emperor's voice crackles over Japanese radios for the first time in history, announcing the unbearable, Soviet forces have penetrated over 500 kilometers into Manchuria on multiple fronts. They have captured or destroyed 22 Japanese divisions. 80,000 Japanese soldiers are dead. Nearly 600,000 more will become prisoners, and hundreds of thousands of them will never return from Soviet labor camps. The Kwantung Army, which in 1941 fielded over 1 million men, which was considered the finest military force in Asia, which had conquered Manchuria in a matter of weeks 14 years earlier, has been annihilated in less than a week. And the Soviets are still advancing. August 18, 1945. Mukden. General Yamada Otozo, commander of the Kwantung Army, formally surrenders to Soviet Marshal Vasilevsky. The ceremony is brief. Yamada's face is a mask of exhaustion and shame. He has presided over the most rapid and complete military disaster in Japanese history. Vasilevsky accepts the surrender with cold formality. He has accomplished exactly what Stalin demanded: the destruction of Japanese power in Asia and the seizure of territory that will give the Soviet Union a dominant position in Manchuria, Korea, and the Kurils. All of this in 9 days. The speed of the Soviet victory stuns military observers around the world. The same Japanese army that resisted the Americans for years, that fought to the death on island after island, that made the capture of Okinawa cost 50,000 American casualties. That army collapsed in days when confronted with Soviet armor and artillery. Why? The answer is complex, but part of it lies in what the Japanese themselves said when the invasion began. They knew. They knew the Kwantung Army was hollow. They knew Soviet neutrality was their last diplomatic card. They knew that once that card was played against them, they had nothing left. In the weeks that follow, The full dimensions of the disaster become clear. The Soviet Union occupies all of Manchuria, the northern half of Korea, the southern half of Sakhalin Island, and the entire Kuril Island chain. These territorial gains, extracted in 9 days of fighting, will shape Asian geopolitics for the next 80 years and beyond. The division of Korea will lead to a war that kills millions. The Kuril dispute will prevent a peace treaty between Russia and Japan into the 21st century. For the Japanese leadership, the Soviet invasion delivered a shock that even the atomic bombs could not. Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed hundreds of thousands and demonstrated a terrifying new weapon. But they did not fundamentally alter the strategic calculus. Japan's leaders had already accepted that their cities would be destroyed. They had watched 66 cities burn in the firebombing campaign. 2 more, even by atomic fire, were absorbed into the same grim accounting. But the Soviet invasion broke something deeper. It shattered the final illusion, the belief that Japan could negotiate its way out of total defeat. For months, Japanese diplomats had been secretly approaching Moscow, hoping the Soviets would serve as intermediaries with the Americans. Stalin listened to these approaches, extracted intelligence from them, and then, at the moment of maximum advantage, struck. The Japanese discovered that they had been played. Their last hope was not just denied, it had never existed. What did the Japanese say when the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria? Foreign Minister Togo: "This is the end." War Minister Anami, even as he argued for continued resistance: "The situation has fundamentally changed." Emperor Hirohito, in words that would echo through history: "The Soviet Union has entered the war against us, and to continue the war under these conditions would only result in the annihilation of the Japanese nation." Lord Keeper Kaido, in his diary: "The game is up." These words, recorded in diaries, in meeting minutes, in memoirs written years later, reveal the psychological impact of the Soviet invasion. The atomic bombs showed Japan could be destroyed. The Soviet invasion showed Japan could not escape. There would be no negotiated peace, no face-saving compromise, no preservation of the empire. There would only be unconditional surrender or extinction. Japan chose surrender. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria lasted 9 days. In those 9 days, a military force of over 700,000 men was annihilated. An empire built over half a century was erased. A war that had consumed Asia for 14 years finally ended. And in Tokyo, in the councils of power, men who had sent millions to their deaths finally confronted a truth they could no longer escape. They had gambled everything on Soviet neutrality. They had built their entire endgame strategy on the hope that Moscow would help them negotiate. When that hope died, in the early morning hours of August 9, 1945, so did Japan's will to continue fighting. The atomic bombs gave Japan a reason to surrender. The Soviet invasion gave Japan no choice. The emperor's voice, thin and formal, crackled over the radio on August 15th. Most Japanese had never heard it before. Many could barely understand his archaic court language, but they understood enough. The war was over. In Manchuria, Soviet tanks were still rolling. In Tokyo, War Minister Anami was preparing to take his own life. In cities across Japan, people wept, some in grief, some in relief, many in both. And in the silence that followed the emperor's words, an empire that had dreamed of dominating Asia finally acknowledged its end.